Hi, this is Dr. Joe Green, head pastor of Antioch Assembly Church located in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Also the founder of the 2019 movement, and I want to share a couple of thoughts with you. I want to talk today about white supremacy, and the title of this talk is How to Defeat White Supremacy. And the reason I think that this is such an important topic is because in the current climate of racial unrest, we hear this term thrown out a lot about white supremacy. So black people are really big on white supremacy this and white supremacy that. You know, you have the liberals and progressives that are some of them who aren't black are coming up with this idea of white guilt. And, and many people have the right sentiment. You know, some of them have the right ideals, but they're misguided. And so I'm going to talk about what white supremacy really is, because white supremacy is a misnomer. And the idea of white supremacy is based on this to a certain degree. Is, we had slavery in America. The founding fathers, many of them were slave owners. We had legalized slavery in America. It was abolished in 1865 through the Emancipation Proclamation. Then you had Jim Crow laws. You had Negro codes. You had segregatory laws in the country as well that existed for some time. And so that's what we use for white supremacy, for the definition of white supremacy. Many people will say that black people are basically handicapped to a certain degree because of white supremacy, which means there's this thing called white privilege. And white privilege means that white people are born with an inherent privilege in our society. And to a certain degree, that's true in certain areas and certain aspects. But we need to dig a little bit deeper into this, because the problem is when with the powers that be, the ruling elite, those who would be defined as white supremacy, they understand how the masses operate. And I'm going to talk about that. But because they understand how the masses operate, they also understand how to kind of control and manipulate from an emotional standpoint. And so we, especially black people, we have become lower level emotional thinkers. And so because of that, we think from our emotions and our experience, our immediate experience, and we use that as a reality. And we ignore things like facts and numbers and data and actually documentation, because we are more immediate. And it was intentional. You think about the generations past for black people, whether it be during the time of slavery or Jim Crow or segregation in the South, we all had relatives that they stood for principles, they stood for strategies, and they moved in a certain direction, even in the event that many of them didn't ever believe that they would see freedom in their lifetime. But yet they had a long-term plan. And see, when you understand, when you're working with the ruling elite, when you're working with the globalists or working with what you call white supremacy, they don't have, they're not operating and functioning on an emotional level. They're functioning on they use logic, they use long-term strategizing and goals. And so because of that, when you are trying to defeat someone who is thinking from a logical standpoint, using long-term goals, and your response is an emotional or immediate gratification mindset, you're going to lose every time, because you're easily manipulated. And so because of the fact that we're basing things on emotion now, we're not looking at the larger picture, we're being manipulated, and it's based on emotions. This whole thing with President Trump is I call it Trump derangement syndrome, that black people know that historically we have had some issues. And even those who tout white supremacy this, white supremacy that, and they talk about the history of America, but yet they're trusting the very system of oppression that they have acknowledged has been their oppressor. So, here's what before I move on, I just want to say this. Is there anybody out here who, with their logical mind, believes that CNN and Fox News and mainstream media and the Hollywood movie studios and the entertainment industry, is there any of us that believes that, that they're not owned by the power structure, white supremacy? Do we think that Nike is not owned by the same people that sit at the table with those who we call white supremacy or white supremacists? Is there anybody in their right mind that thinks that somehow or another Nike all of a sudden loves black people? That's not the case. They are, they think logically. They think long term. And so they employ long-term strategies to manipulate us. And I'm going to talk about them. And the reason that I say that I use Nike, because Nike has taken the forefront in this social justice perception. They're trying to give the perception as social justice warriors. But we all know that Nike doesn't care about poor and black communities. Let's be honest. First of all, they have consistently gotten in trouble for having sweatshops in third world countries, which means they really don't care about poor people and they really don't care about the masses. It's all about a bottom line. I remember back in the days, they had these sneakers that were $100 sneakers. They were sold for $100 in America. And I remember a friend who was in the military said he was over in Vietnam and those same sneakers were made for less than $10 a piece. So less than $10 it costs to make them. They sell them for $100 and they use these sweatshops over in these third world countries. And they've gotten in trouble for a long time because of that. So this whole idea that all of a sudden they are fighting or defending the common person, they're using people like LeBron James and Colin Kaepernick. These are just assets of Nike. What they're doing is they're positioning themselves for the next generation, the millennials, because the millennials are very much social justice activists. And because of that, they position themselves in a right relationship with these generations, knowing that that's going to mean long-term profits, because most of these people that are conservatives, most of the people that are the middle-aged or even the older people, that's not the market that Nike is targeting. They don't spend as much money on sneakers as the millennials do and the generations after them. So they're positioning themselves and they're using professional athletes to do so. So Colin Kaepernick, LeBron James, I hope I don't burst anybody's bubble, but they're agents of what you would call white supremacy, because the people that own Nike are globalists. They're ruling elite class people. You don't sit at the dinner table with the CEO of Nike. They sit at the same tables and they're part of the same groups and organizations and secret societies as the people that own the CNNs, that own Fox News, that own, so let's not kid ourselves. That's why we get manipulated, because they have these beautiful commercials and these beautiful products. And they say, if you believe in something, be willing to sacrifice. Colin Kaepernick didn't really sacrifice anything. Let's be honest. He didn't sacrifice anything. He's still a multi-million-dollar athlete. I read his net worth is like $20 million, and this Nike contract that he has now is worth tens of millions of dollars. His product line is selling, and so he didn't sacrifice anything. It's a strategy, a long-term strategy that he will remain relevant even after his playing days would be over. LeBron James is at the end of his career. Now, all of a sudden, he's becoming vocal. And LeBron James is worth almost $1 billion. He's worth at least $750 million. And so because of that, you don't fool yourself into thinking that somehow or another that he's relating to the common man. And this whole notion that he opened a school in his hometown, that's not true. LeBron James didn't open up a school. He gave money and I commend him for giving money to a public school. He gave money to a public school. Public schools are funded by taxpayer dollars. So he gave money to this public school, and those who graduate from this school, they actually can get a scholarship. I think it's the University of Akron, but that's subsidized by the university. It's not subsidized by LeBron James. So basically what this is Nike also partnering with LeBron James. It's a marketing strategy. He's branding himself for his next phase in life, because he only has a couple of more years in order to play in the NBA. And the other thing LeBron James is doing is he wants to be considered the GOAT. There's a lot of reports out there that he really reached out to Michael Jordan, and that was one of his idols growing up, and Michael Jordan didn't reciprocate. So Michael Jordan always favored Kobe Bryant over LeBron James, and because of that, LeBron now is on a mission to be considered the greatest basketball player ever. So he can't do it with rings because his record in the finals is not a good one. So Michael Jordan was 6-0 in the finals, never lost a final, never went to Game 7. He has a reputation for being a killer in the fourth quarter, that Michael Jordan always stepped up to the challenge and he always won. That's one of the reasons why he's considered the GOAT. Michael Jordan there was years where he led the league in scoring and in steals. He was not only the scoring leader, but the defensive, the number one defensive player in the league. And so when you do that, you are dominating. You're dominant. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of give some background of where I'm going with this, because it's deeper. You got to look deeper beyond the surface. You can't keep looking at the surface and see what we see, what we're being fed, and just go along with it. Okay, so white supremacy is this system, or ideology based upon the belief that white people are superior in many ways to people of other races, and that white people should be dominant over other races. So many people will say that the United States was founded or built upon the ideal of white supremacy. And there were laws in the books for many years that actually confirmed that, or upheld this idea of certain races were more superior than others. You also have this philosophy called social Darwinism, and social Darwinism is a term used to refer to various ways of thinking and theories that emerged. Social Darwinism became prevalent in the second half of the 18th century. The 19th century, excuse me. So the late 1800s is when this became very prominent. Most of you are familiar with Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin wrote a book called The Origin of the Species Through Natural Selection. It's based on race theory. If you read the book, the subtitle is "The Race to Preserve the Favored Races," and in the Race for Life, or something along those lines. It's based on race theory. It helped to promote race theory. So they created this concept of race. So there's three primary races: white, black, and Mongoloid, Negroid, Caucasoid, and Mongoloid. And they came up with that strategy as a way to control the masses. Because if you know that slavery was very prominent in the 17th and 18th century, and you have to also understand that the Christian Western world was the first time that slavery was considered to be wrong. I'm going to say this again, and I'm going to challenge you, because as I move forward in this, I just want you to have an open mind. See, the problem is that many people are so caught up in their emotions that they won't listen to facts. They don't read history. They don't look at the actual documentation, and they just listen to the news, CNN, and their friends and social media to tell them what's true and what's not true. They look at memes, and when you see a good meme, you say that must be the truth because somebody shared a meme on Facebook that says this. So we got to look deeper, because if you don't have an open mind, you're going to be manipulated and nothing will ever get solved. So you have this idea of social Darwinism, white, black, and Mongoloid, Negroid, Caucasoid, and Mongoloid were the races they separated humanity up to. And that allowed them to continue to perpetuate the ideal of slavery, of chattel slavery in America and in Great Britain. But you have these people like William Wilberforce, who was a Christian, and he was an abolitionist, a white person, who started to preach and to teach about how slavery was evil and wicked, and it was based on the Bible. It wasn't in spite of the Bible, because the Bible doesn't condone slavery. People will say it does. It doesn't condone chattel slavery. I'm going to say that again. It doesn't condone chattel slavery. Chattel slavery was the idea that people were personal property and they could be owned and sold and traded. That's what chattel slavery was. And so it was William Wilberforce, who was one of the early abolitionists in England, who began to push this idea that slavery was evil. And slavery was first abolished in England, I think it was in the 1830s, and in the British colonies. And then it wasn't until the 1860s that the abolitionists in America used William Wilberforce's strategies in order to get slavery abolished in the United States. Slavery still exists around the world. It is an age-old practice. And so when people use the transatlantic slave trade as a sign of how wicked and evil America was, it wasn't an American phenomena. It was America and Great Britain in the West that actually was one of the main people that helped to push the idea that slavery was evil. And they used the Bible. They used, our documentation said that all men were created equal. They were endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights. That idea was a new concept to humanity. It wasn't a new concept in the Bible or in Christianity, because the slavery in the Bible was indentured servitude, and there was commandments in the Bible that during the year of Jubilee or if a person owed money, if they owed money, they worked off that debt, they were free, or during the year of Jubilee, they were required to free the slaves. So the Bible doesn't condone slavery. So we need to stop believing that. That's not true. Also, the Bible doesn't condone racism. In the Bible, when God commanded his people not to marry into certain tribes, it had nothing to do with the color of their skin. It was based on culture. And because when we understand what race theory and race science does with social Darwinism and these other ideologies, what they did is they removed culture out of the scenario and they implemented skin color. And that's not what God ever did. It's always based on culture. When Cain killed Abel, they had the same mother and father. So, we see this throughout the scriptures. But I need you to understand that race is a social construct that was created by the globalists, by the ruling elite, in order to control and to manipulate the masses. Because the Bible doesn't talk about race. It always talks about culture. It talks about nations. And culture was based on behaviors and patterns, not based on skin color. The reason that God loved he loved Jacob and hated Esau, if you read the oral tradition of the Bible, it wasn't because of race, because again, they had the same mother and father, but it was because of their behaviors. The reason that God cursed Ham's youngest son, Canaan, wasn't because of the skin color. It was because of his behaviors. He was participating in sexual perversion, and that's why God judged him. And so I wanted to lay that foundation as we move forward, because you have to be able to open your mind and overcome these myths that are perpetrated on us, because these myths only keep us separated. So you have social Darwinism, which allowed people to believe that certain races were inferior to others. And that was what helped to perpetuate the idea of slavery. And that's one of the ideas that is still prominent. But I also need you to understand that it wasn't even about the skin color. It was, slavery, like I said, the globalists, the ruling elite, what we call white supremacy, they think logically. They don't think from an emotional level. So slavery wasn't based on emotions. Slavery was based on economics. It was a monetary system. They got free labor. They bought and sold people based on economics. That's what it was based on. And because they start to push this idea of racism, or I should say race as a social construct, it allowed them to continue to manipulate people. So you had other groups of people that weren't proponents of slavery. They didn't agree with slavery, but because they had been sold this idea that certain races were inferior, it justified enslaving black people because they said that they were inferior. It was almost like a dog or a horse that I have. If I have a horse or a dog, I understand that they are lower on the food chain, if you will, that they are not on the same level as humans. And so it's okay for me to own a dog or own a horse because they're not equal to humans. So if you push the same ideology with racism, and you push the fact that darker skinned people from Africa are less evolved, even though it's just a different culture, then people aren't as opposed to slavery as they would be if they believe that they're equal with everybody else. But of course, it was the idea of all men are created equal and created in the image of God, which caused Christians in America to fight against slavery. That was the people that the abolitionists were mainly mainly Christians that fought against slavery. So you got to understand that it wasn't, and the idea of all white people were slave owners and all black people were slaves is not true either. It was a small statistic of people that actually were slave owners in the overall scheme of things. And this doesn't justify slavery, but it puts it in its proper perspective. Another thing that you need to understand is that this white supremacy that we call it wasn't based on just white skin either, because of the fact that until the late 19th and early 20th, the late 19th and early 20th century, that not all people with white skin was considered white. So you had like Irish people, Italians, they weren't designated as white people until like the 1930s. Up until then, they were designated as non-whites. So you had people like the Irish, the Italians, the Polish, the Slavics, the Greeks, and other immigrants that they were considered non-whites until the 1920s or the 1930s. Now, they weren't considered black, so they were above black people, but they were still below white people. So you had different You had Anglo-Saxons and then you have Teutonic races. So when we break up race as Caucasians, Caucasian is a race, but you have to recognize that there's actually, anthropological differentiations based on Anglo-Saxons versus Caucasians. Those are different people, different types of people. So, for instance, an Arab person is considered a Caucasian. An Arab person, I'm going to say that again, is considered a Caucasian from a race perspective, but they're not considered Anglo-Saxon. And so, I just need to give a little bit more detail because we have to think in a deeper level, because the reason that this is coming out so just surface is because it's a way of manipulation by what we call white supremacy, or by the powers that be, because it wasn't just white people. It's a certain group of people. It's a ruling elite class. If you remember the Occupy Wall Street movement, Occupy Wall Street started in 2011 in New York, in Zuccotti Park. And so what these people were doing was they were fighting against the one percenters. They recognize, so the Occupy movement identified the oppressive policies in America and worldwide based on the ruling elite, the globalists, the bankers, right? So you have groups like the Rothschild banking cartel. You have the other families that are the ruling elite families. So Occupy movement recognized that it's one percenters. And so you got to realize that, especially in America, the one percenters excludes a whole lot of people that we call white. They're not in the mix either. They're being manipulated just like we are. But anyway, so you have to understand that there wasn't certain what we call white people. They were discriminated upon as well. The Jews, the European Jews, were also discriminated upon. Now, I know what a lot of people will say, and you've heard me say this before. It's the ruling elite, what we call Zionist Jews, that are actually running things. It's not every single European Jew that is a part of this. It is a certain class of people, and they are Kabbalists. They are people that believe that they have a special bloodlines that makes them superior to other races or other groups of people. I shouldn't say races. I should say other groups of people. Now, the ruling elite are a small group of individuals that look at the rest of the world as expendable tools to be used primarily for their gain, 1%. And I would say even maybe 0.5%, because if you listen to the lectures given by some of the globalists, they believe that the population of the earth should only be 500 million people. So if you think about 1%, there's about 7 billion people in the world. 1% would be 700 million people. So it's less than 1% actually that they believe are the ruling class, that are the superior groups of people. It's only less than 1% of the population that they believe. So that means that the rest of the 99%, which includes other people that we would call white, are also a part of the conspiracy, the oppressive conspiracy that they perpetuate. So you had this aristocracy class of people, primarily those elite in the banking industry, the arts, philosophy in Europe, the ruling political classes in business and industry that believe that they are superior to the rest of humanity. Their books that they've written, and I'm going to share a couple of the books that they've written, documentation and the like, that spell out their ideology. You know, this thing called the Illuminati, the Order of the Illuminati, that was created by Adam Weishaupt in 1776, I believe it was. It was actually European governments busted them and found their documents and actually passed laws to ban them. And so this is a real thing. They're part of the Illuminati, and they believe that Lucifer actually is the head of their new world order that they're moving towards. They began to push race science, like I said, in the 20th century, and in order to get the masses fighting over trivial things that would keep the masses from exposing their plot. Let me give you a prime example of their strategy. So you had this person, Marie Antoinette, and she was the last queen of France before the French Revolution. You may be familiar with Marie Antoinette. She was the famous person. Her famous quote was, "Let 'em eat cake." And so what it was is that, they began to go to her because people in France were starving, and they told her, hey, the people don't have any bread. And so her response was, "Let 'em eat cake," which meant that she was basically detached from the realities of life. She didn't understand what they were dealing with. And so she was like, well, just let them eat cake instead of bread. So what happened was, soon after that, they came in and, you had the French Revolution, and they overthrew Marie Antoinette. and the other ruling class in France and some of the other European countries, and they beheaded her. You also had in Russia, you had the czars. And so they were a ruling class group of people. And in 1917, you had the Bolshevik Revolution, which they overthrew the czars, and they did the same. They beheaded them, they killed them, did all kind of nasty stuff to them. But what happened was when this happened, there was a shift. So you have these people like Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin and some of these other people that actually was coming up with a New World Order strategy. And so they targeted these centralized governments because they were pushing for a New World Order, a one world governmental system. And so what they did, they came up with communism and socialism as a strategy to convince the masses that they were fighting on their behalf against these ruling class people. But in essence, what they were doing is they were just replacing regional ruling class people with a global ruling class mentality. So their goal was for a one world government, which the Bible talks about in the book of Revelation, in the book of Daniel. And here's how the deception begins. Because they say that they're fighting for the working class, but they're not. They act like they're empowering the people, but they're not. They are just, instead of, so you had France and you had the French aristocracy, the German royal families, and all these other people, and they were actually just regional government dictators. But what they were doing is they were just replacing them so that they could implement a global government dictator. So I need you to understand what I just said. It was just that they were trying to destroy regional governments in order to have a one world governmental system. So Marxism has spread throughout Europe and even into America in the 20th century. And so you had Karl Marx, who wrote the Communist Manifesto, and it was a strategy that convinced the masses that they were there fighting for the working class. If you know that the bald fist that Lenin did says, power to the people, power to the working class. It actually was something that was adopted even by the civil rights movement, because a lot of the civil rights movement was based on Marxism and Marxism, I should say. Because Karl Marx was one of the founders. So it was based on Marxism, based on socialism and communism. And what they do is they act like they're giving power to the people, but they actually destroy the middle class and implement just a different class of people. So you have the working class and then you have the ruling elite. But it actually takes power away from the working class, because instead of having a middle class and you have upward mobility, they destroy that. And so if you're in the working class, you stay in the working class. You have no upward mobility unless they can identify you as being a talented person, and then you come work for them. So in Soviet Russia, the only people that, other than the ruling class, the worker class, the only people that came out of that were athletes or entertainers. So you had great boxers and other athletes in the Russian, Soviet Russia. They were employed by the government, and they got a little bit more money and more resources than the rest of them. And they were used to control the masses and to get the people to have so much pride in their country that they at times stopped fighting. They're still employing these tactics today. And so I'm going to talk about these tactics and how they're still being employed, because you have to understand that this whole thing that we call white supremacy, which I call the ruling class, the ruling elite, it's not a new philosophy. It's the same strategy. It's just employed, and it's the same group of people. But because, like I said previously, they think long-term, multi-generationally to get their strategy fulfilled, because they think that way, we're easily to be manipulated, because we base things on our emotions and our current situation instead of long-term, multi-level dimensions of thinking. There's a couple of books I'm going to share with you that gives deeper insight into the New World Order. So the one book that I mentioned a couple times is the Communist Manifesto. If you get a chance to look at that, by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. You also have a book by Aldous Huxley called Brave New World. And that's a really good book for you to understand, because Brave New World talks about the strategy, how it's really been pushed in the Western world and in America. So they were going to create a utopian society by taking away all restraints from sexual restraints. So, sexual freedom, which is why you had the sexual revolution of the 60s. They used drugs and they used other things as a distraction. So people were so drugged out and running around here having sex with everybody that they ignored the fact that they were being controlled by the government. So it's good to look at Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Aldous Huxley was one of the people in the think tanks and the various think tanks that helped to push the one world order. Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals is a very good book because some of the very specific strategies that we see now that's being used by the liberals and the progressives is right out of Saul Alinsky's book. So some of the things like ridiculing the other side or marginalizing opinions that are different than yours. Political correctness is one of the strategies that they came up with in order to silence opposing viewpoints. What else did they do? They also always created a victim mentality. So every group of people they went to, they created some type of victim mentality within that group so that they can control and manipulate them. So they go to poor people and they say, it's the rich people with all this wealth that's causing your problems. They go to black people. They say it's white people that's your problems. They go to white people and say, you got to be scared of these black people because they're coming to get your daughters. You have the, and this is real talk. I'm not just making this stuff up off the top of my head. These are real things and strategies that they use. You have gay people now. They're saying straight people are your problem. You have women. They say men are your problem. So you have this feminist movement, especially with the Me Too movement, is a prime example of one of the strategies that they're using in order to emasculate men. So the Me Too movement that's trying to empower women, it's not trying to empower women to make women equal. It's trying to make women dominant over males. And so it's a breakdown of the masculine, the masculine aspect of our society, which is why President Trump really is the enemy to them, because he is like super alpha male. He has no, he doesn't demonstrate feminine energy that some of the other, like President Obama, let's be honest, he was very passive and had a type of feminine energy. He wasn't a threat even to white America. Very, very calm and laid back. And that's what they like. They don't want an aggressive male. You wouldn't have seen an aggressive black man in that position because that doesn't help to fit their narrative. Margaret Sanger wrote a book called The Pivot of Civilization. And that I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and that's based on eugenics, which is ethnic cleansing. Margaret Sanger was a person that believed in ethnic cleansing. You also have a book that's probably not as popular. It's Hitler's Mein Kampf, and he wrote a book called Mein Kampf. And Hitler and the Nazis, they believed in a superior race, and it wasn't just white people. It was the Aryans, which is a specific class of people within the confines of what we call the white race, and which is why Hitler, when he got in power, he didn't fight non-white people. He fought other European. He went in and overthrew these other European countries, and got all the way to Great Britain when the Allies came in and turned him back. There's two strategies that's employed by this group. And the two strategies, the two philosophies within this overall, what we call white supremacist idea, is population reduction and population control. So population reduction is they're getting rid of what they call the useless feeders or the human weeds, which are the dregs of the society, the inferior races. So they came up with the idea of population control and population reduction. There are organizations that they created as a meeting place for people with this ruling elite mindset. So you're either a part of these bloodline families or you've been identified as a tool that they can use. In various races and various cultures and ethnicities, they identify these people and bring them to the table. So here's some of the organizations. You have the Frankfurt School in Germany. You have the Tavistock Institute of London. If you get a chance, you can research these organizations. The CIA. The CIA is an offshoot of Tavistock, and you have the CIA, MI6, and these other intelligence agencies. They are offshoot of this globalist ideology, and they're used as a tool in order to promote this globalist one world order, new world order agenda. You have groups like the Bilderberg Group, the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Affairs, and other groups, Bohemian Grove, and there's other groups out there. I just named a couple for you to look at and begin to understand that most of the people that you see, whether it's the media moguls, the people that own the media companies, or the top people on these various networks, they're part of these groups like the Bilderberg groups. If you look from a political standpoint, you usually have people that they're all members of the Trilateral Commission. Rick Warren, who's the pastor of Saddleback Church, the Purpose Driven Life. He's a member of Council on Foreign Affairs, so he's a globalist as well, which is ironic because if you're truly a pastor that believes in the Bible and the authority of Scripture, then you shouldn't be a globalist. You shouldn't look for a one world governmental system, which is why one of the reasons why he's promoted so heavily, because he's a globalist. These organizations employ the top brass in business, banking, political, media, higher education, entertainment industries. They provide wealth, status, and awards. They openly commend certain people and put them on a pedestal as your opinion makers. So when you look at award shows like the Grammys, the Oscars, the Emmys, these other awards, these are ceremonies where they basically promote and applaud people that are a part of their organizations. Now, there are some people, like Monique, for instance, that when they gave her an award, they're inviting you to the upper echelons in their groups. And at this point, it seems as though, and this might have changed recently, but it seems as though Monique had rejected them. She wanted to be her own person, and because of that, they started to blackball you. Dave Chappelle went through the same thing. Dave Chappelle's show became so popular, they offered him $50 million. And he turned it down and he went away. So they began to blackball him. They began to say that he was crazy, he was on drugs and all this other stuff. Because Cat Williams is another example. And Cat Williams began to speak out in different groups. So what happens is when you identify yourself as very talented and have a huge following, they invite you to the table, but you have to sign on the dotted line, if you will, and you have to promote their agenda. And they have things like the Grammys and stuff. They are actually positioning people as opinion makers to help sway public opinion, but they're actually only carrying out the agenda of the global elite. Because think about this, how ridiculous it is. And I've said this for years. Actors, singers, comedians, and athletes, how do they become the opinion makers of a society? Just because you're a great athlete and you can dunk a basketball or run real fast doesn't mean you're a genius. It doesn't mean your opinion weighs more heavily than anybody else. If you're a great actor or something. But what happens is they promote this because they know that we attach ourselves to celebrities. So because it's our favorite athlete, we connect ourselves to them emotionally. And so when they give us an opinion, they act as though they're speaking on our behalf. We believe what they say. You know, one of the things about Bill Cosby, and I believe this very clearly, that he was promoted in that way as well. But then once he stopped playing ball, if you will, he started going against their narrative. That's when they now throw him under the bus, because all the stuff that happened to Bill Cosby is not new stuff. These allegations and these accusations have been out there for a long time. So why is it all of a sudden now they want to, that they're really pushing the envelope? It's because he stopped going along with the narrative. LeBron James is being promoted right now as though he has an opinion that's better than anybody else's. And I even heard him say, we have an obligation to speak on behalf of the people we represent. You don't represent anybody if you're an athlete. You're an entertainer. I pay money to go to a basketball game to see you play basketball. It doesn't mean you're supposed to give me an opinion or speak on my behalf, because what if I don't agree with you? And it's very clear. And see, what happens is when the masses, when you don't educate yourself on these things, when you don't read and study and understand the background of these things, you'll get taken advantage of and you'll say, yeah, he's speaking for me. Or he really cares about my society. He doesn't relate to you. If you're worth $750 million, you travel the world all you want, you're world renowned, he gets to sit at the table with Warren Buffett and Bill Gates. He doesn't have the same issues that you have. He doesn't have the same considerations as you. He's not worried about paying his rent or whether or not he's going to pay to put his kids through college. He's not worrying about those things. So we need to come out, take off our blinders and start to understand that this is all part of their strategy that they've been employing for some time. And that's why when you understand in the media, when you look at Hollywood, 90 to 100% of all Hollywood actors have the same views and the same opinions. When you look at, the music industry and professional sports, they can't go against the grain. And because one of the things you got to realize is that Trump is is an anti-globalist. He's a nationalist. He's an anti-globalist. He's fighting this globalist agenda. You know, whether you agree with him or not, but that's what he's doing. All the platforms and all the things that he mentions are anti-globalists in their agenda. So, but because most of us don't understand who the ruling elite are, we don't understand who white supremacy really is, and we don't understand their strategy. We don't know that he's fighting against them. We think that he's what they say that we are. But the people that's telling us who he is are the people that's part of white supremacy. So we got to wake up, people. We got to wake up. 90% of all Hollywood and people in the media have the same opinion. 90% of the media supported financially or voted for Hillary Clinton. 90% of all Hollywood stand for liberal progressive Democrats. And that is who the globalists are using now to destroy and corrupt society and culture. That's why people like Kanye West, when he expresses an opinion that varies from the rest of them, he gets blackballed. They say he's crazy. He has a nervous breakdown. Tim Allen, who was very famous, Tim the Tool Man, he was very famous, had a very high rated television show because he told them that he was a Republican and he went to Trump's inauguration. Now all of a sudden his show gets canceled. You could look this up. This is not my opinion. Roseanne Barr has been the same person for ever since she's been in the public sector, but because she started to be outspoken for conservative issues and for Trump and for Republicans, she had to get blackballed. That's how they do things. This is classic Marxist ideology. This is classic Marxist globalist ideology. And because the masses have been deceived and placed in the media stupor, the masses, especially black people, are easily manipulated into following their prepackaged conclusions. So they're giving you an opinion. They're telling you how you should feel, how you should think. This is not free will or open-mindedness. They're telling you what you should think. Because why should Hollywood at the Oscars or at the Grammys, why should they all stand up and pounce on a certain political candidate? Do they not understand that almost 50% of the country voted for President Trump? It was very close. It was only out of 120 million people, there was about a 2 or 3 million vote difference. That's not a huge margin when you're talking about 120 million. So obviously, the 90% clip at which Hollywood has the same opinion is all staged. It's not real. They don't know any more than you do. The only thing they know more about than you do is about acting. That's it. And probably money, because they have more of it than you do. One of the greatest weapons ever created for the purpose of manipulating the masses was the invention of what's known as pop culture. Pop culture was created by the CIA using the research that the Tavistock and Frankfurt schools and these other think tanks develop on how to psychologically control mass thought. So pop culture is what we're talking about. Hollywood, the music industry. When you talk about, you have a genre of music, you have country, rap, you have all this other stuff, and then you have pop music. That was all created by these think tanks in order to control and manipulate the masses. The various methods of that they're using is population control. So we talked about eugenics. Eugenics just means ethnic cleansing. So the Rockefeller family is going to be very instrumental in what we're looking at here. The Rockefeller family, they created what was called the Bureau of Social Hygiene and in 1913, it was the Bureau of Social Hygiene. It was run by the Rockefeller Foundation. So they did a study. They started to examine crime and all this other stuff in New York and other places. And so they came up with a strategy. They said that they were studying the prevention of social conditions, crimes, and diseases which adversely affect the well-being of society, with special reference to prostitution and the evils associated therewith. That was what they expressed that the Rockefeller Foundation was supposed to be doing. But that's not really what they were doing. They were globalists. They were elitists. And so what they did is they used their research to say that the problem is, are you ready for this? That you have inferior races and inferior people that are causing crime to rise and causing all this other stuff to happen. So that was a justification for ethnic cleansing or eugenics, because what their philosophy said was that if you get rid of these human weeds, these lower class of people, it'll make society better as a whole. And guess who was the inferior races that they were talking about. It was primarily black people and other people. So after slavery was abolished in the 1860s, now you have this rise in the black population, and they're doing things and they're branching out. So they said we have to come up with a way to control, because the more that they infiltrate our society, the worse our society becomes. That's what it's based on. In the 1920s, of course, you have the Rockefeller Family Foundation. They give money to Margaret Sanger, who starts Planned Parenthood. She was a eugenicist. She wanted to come up with a way of reducing the population of these inferior races. You know, Hitler and the Nazis also received funding from the Rockefeller Foundation, who also funds higher education universities like Stanford University and Harvard and all those other schools. They actually give money to them to do studies, and so they come up with the conclusions basically that they want them to come up with. But Hitler, in his 1924 book Mein Kampf, he says he had to admit that he couldn't take credit for what happened. He couldn't take credit for the strategy that they came up with, which the Nazis were into ethnic cleansing or eugenics. He said we got to give credit to the Americans. And more specifically, Joseph Mengele and their experiments that they did in Nuremberg and the various concentration camps. The Rockefeller family gave money to Joseph Mengele to study ethnic cleansing. In the 1800s and the early 1900s, organizations such as the Ku Klux Klan was created to keep from race mixing. They believed that if the blacks in the South mixed with the whites in the South, it would degrade the white race. And there's a movie called The Birth of a Nation that was created by D.W. Griffin. It's considered an American classic. It's the movie about the formation of the Ku Klux Klan. And basically what they're saying is that the Ku Klux Klan was created and developed in order to protect white people from black men. White women, from black men. So that was the formation of the Ku Klux Klan. And they also was fighting against racial race mixing, because they believed that if the black race mixed with the white race, that it was going to degrade the white race. So then also in the beginning of the 20th century, now this is all white supremacy. This is all the strategy of the globalists. And I want to give you a historical foundation so that when you see the things that are happening now in 2018, you will see that this is all part of this same strategy that's been employed for some time. So at the turn of the 20th century, you had people like Marcus Garvey, who was really strengthening the black community and was creating them to be independent and building up their own communities and business and finance and everything. But it wasn't based on mixing with the larger white culture. It was based on being independent and developing their own culture. So in response to that, the ruling elite created the NAACP, which I believe was 1913. The NAACP was created. They also created in 1904 this organization called the Black Boule, which is a fraternal organization that was focused on black people. And also, after the Black Boule that was created in 1904, they began to develop and create what was called the Black Greek Letter Organization. So in 1906, you had Alpha Kappa Alpha, you have Kappa Alpha Psi, Omega Psi Phi, Phi Beta Sigma, and you have the sororities as well. They were an offshoot of the Boule, and they used them to identify the top 10% of the black community, the most influential and the smartest and the most creative ones. They identified them, they bring them into their group, and then they use them to promote their white supremacist strategy. And this is not a knock on people. I have some good friends that are part of the Black Greek Letter organizations. I'm talking about the higher echelons. So they identify them at the lower echelons. The ones who get called up to the higher echelons are the ones who are part of the conspiracy. So the people at the bottom may or may not know about this or have any or be privy to this information. So I want to be clear about that. It's the ones at the top that are actually helping to promote these agendas. And of course, this is an age-old strategy. It's called controlled opposition, also known as the Hegelian dialectic, which means you control both sides of the narrative and you also provide and control the outcome. And so the reason that it's important to understand the Boule and these Black Greek Letter organizations and the NAACP and these other type of organizations, they were created by what we call white supremacy. And so they never ever come to a solution. They just continue to push the narrative and to stir up fan the flames of racism and separatism and all this other stuff. But ultimately, behind the scenes, they're the ones that's actually controlling the narrative. So when you look at all these black civil rights leaders of this day, you look at the Jesse Jacksons, the Al Sharptons, you look at some of these other people on CNN, the newscasters, all of them are part of this conspiracy. And that's why they all have the same opinion. A black leader that's being popular on CNN or in Hollywood or in the entertainment industry, if they go against the script, if any of them say openly that they supported President Trump, they're in big trouble. They get blackballed. They can't say that. They have to promote the same strategy that's being implemented for 150 years now. Currently, the strategy is being used, as I mentioned earlier, in the sports industrial and entertainment industrial complex. So people like LeBron James, people like Colin Kaepernick, you got Jay-Z and Beyonce and these other notable entertainers, and they actually are pushing a position. They all have the same opinion. That's why Jay-Z and Beyonce had a Hillary Clinton concert, even though Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton destroyed millions of black lives in their time in politics. But yet Jay-Z and Beyonce stands on stage with them and promotes them as the next president, because they're all part of the same global conspiracy. And Jay-Z and Beyonce couldn't go against that narrative, or else they would fear being blackballed or being marginalized. They have the masses fooled into believing that these people can relate to your struggles, and again, that's controlled opposition in the Hegelian dialectic. If you get a chance, look those terms up. But see, what I need to do is I need for us as people to step our game up, to begin to educate ourselves. A lot of times when you start to throw this stuff out there, people just gloss over because they're intellectually lazy. And so because they created us to be intellectually lazy, we don't read books for ourselves. We don't actually study these things. We just sit in front of the tube or in front of the internet, and we let mainstream media and the mainstream sources tell us what we should believe and what we shouldn't believe. So based on the ruling elite that we consider white supremacy and Darwinism, they changed their strategy because it became less and less popular to be openly racist. So they changed their strategy in the middle of the 20th century after the civil rights movement. So you had LBJ, who was also a socialist with the Great Society. And he's basically, if you can't beat him, join him. So he came up with his strategy of using social programs in the welfare system in order to get black people dependent on the system, on the government. And that's important for you to understand, because LBJ was racist. I mean, he used the N-word regularly. And he says, we're not going to give the black people a whole lot, just enough to get them dependent on us. And we're going to have them voting Democrat for the next 200 years. And he used the N-word when he said it, because it was a strategy not to help the black community, but to keep them more dependent on the liberal Democratic Party by promoting socialism and socialist ideas, and to get them loyal and faithful, because they became the swing vote in the 1960s in the national political scene. In the 1960s and the 1980s, you had the CIA and the government allowing the flooding of narcotics into the black community in order to control and manipulate. So in the 60s, you had the heroin epidemic. Now, during the 60s, the American Army was in Vietnam. And so somehow or another, these heroin got from the fields of Vietnam into the black community. In the 1980s, we were involved with the Iran, with the Contras in South America, in Nicaragua. And so mysteriously, crack cocaine comes from the fields of South America into the streets of Los Angeles in the black community. Right. So and it's been documented that they were behind that. It's come out. There's movies, there's documents, there's government documents that shows that they were complicit to this. Then coincidentally enough, you have Bill and Hillary Clinton in the 1990s that not only allowed for the cocaine to come through Mena, Arkansas, where they would land the planes in America to distribute cocaine, but they also came up when they became president, the 1994 Clinton crime bill that not only gave the 3-strike rule, it gave 100 to 1 disproportionate sentences for crack cocaine offenses than powder cocaine. And we all know that crack cocaine was in the black neighborhoods primarily. It was basically blacks and minorities and other minorities that were selling crack cocaine in the neighborhoods, but they would get 100 times longer sentence than their powder cocaine counterparts. Now, anybody that knows about anything about drugs, it's okay if you don't. You can't make crack cocaine without powder cocaine. Powder cocaine is the substance that helps to make crack cocaine. So, but then they would target blacks and minorities with this war on drugs, they called it. The Clintons actually helped to create an atmosphere that helped to prosper, privatize for-profit prisons, and then they helped to pass the bill that helped to load up these prisons, mainly with blacks and Hispanics. And then they get millions of dollars in kickbacks through the Clinton Foundation from privatized prisons. Now, I'm not saying it was just the Democrats, but the Democrats and the Republicans both profited off of that because they didn't do anything to stop it. But what you got to realize is that the Clintons positioned themselves as though they were friends to the black community, and even Hillary still does that. But they were the most instrumental out of any group in this whole conspiracy. They've destroyed the lives of thousands and millions, of black men, and Bill Clinton even admitted to it recently. But that's part of white supremacy, because not only did they have these crime bills, and they had these inner cities where black people were felt hopelessness and lack of opportunities because of segregated housing, and now you have the schools to prison pipeline, which meant that these privatized prisons start to go in the inner cities. They start to get the statistics of their academic performance. And so what they did was they saw that kids who were performing under grade level in the second and third grade, they start to plan a prison cell for them in the future. This was how deep this conspiracy thing goes. But you got to realize that these inner cities that we're talking about are all run by Democrats and liberals and progressives. And so, again, if you're talking about white supremacy, we got to understand who's actually promoting the strategy that's keeping us in oppressed. Also, the Clinton crime bill with drugs, they actually gave special punishments for drug offenses. So you couldn't live in public housing. You had a hard time getting student loans or financial aid and those type of things if you had a drug offense. And so not only now did they create an environment where they allowed the drugs to come into the community, but they gave stiffer penalties and targeted. They had racial profiling, and they gave specific, more intense penalties to these people of color in these inner cities. And then when they get out on the other end, after they paid their debt to society, they had a hard time living in public housing. So how are you going to get back on your feet if you don't have a strong family unit when you get back out there? If you have a baby to a girl and she's living in public housing, dad can't come live with you because he has a drug offense, so he can't live on the property. So it's like a vicious cycle that was created, a revolving door, if you will, because what will happen with these young men who the only thing they could do is sell drugs and make a lot of money? They're going to revert back to crime because they can't. Their opportunities are limited. So this was a vicious cycle that was created of white supremacy, but it was primarily the progressives, the liberals, and the Democrats that helped to push it to the next level. And so then the welfare system and all these things that were set up to a certain degree based on social Darwinism, because they now convinced you through the welfare system, after they broke down the family, incarcerated the males, that you can't succeed unless the government helps you. That's what social Darwinism says, that you're an inferior. And so the only way you can succeed is if the government helps you. And so now you become more dependent on the government, and you start to become a victim because you believe that I can't do anything to succeed or to elevate myself out of this situation. That's why you have multi-generations of people that's on welfare, that's broken down, that's incarcerated. You have multi-generations of this over the last 50 years. And that's part of the strategy of what you call, and what some call, white supremacy. So we have to understand that and not fall victim to that. And then identity politics, which happened, mainly shifted in the 60s and the 70s. So black people now believe through the Boule system and through the controlled opposition that the Democrats are our friends and they care about us. So now we not only defend them, but we give them all our support, and we fight against opposing viewpoints that may give us what we need. As the Communist Manifesto states, if you can break down the nuclear family and corrupt the morals of a culture, then you'll destroy and control and implement a culture of perpetual destruction, hopelessness, and dependency on the very system of white supremacy that black people believe hates them. I know that was a deep sentence that I just said, but you need to understand that breakdown of the family is one of the primary strategies in order to destroy a culture. And then they corrupted the culture through black exploitation films and entertainment. They started to fund things like gangster rap that creates a culture of criminality and hopelessness and despair and materialism. So not only do I feel like I can't achieve anything and go to school because I'm relating to myself as being a thug and a gangster, but now I need material stuff because they promote materialism. And the only way I'm going to get that escalate is by going out and selling drugs or robbing a bank or something. So it's a perpetual cycle that they create through corrupting of the culture and through pushing this whole thing. And when you have groups, and that's why I say identity politics, because it's liberals and progressive. You have, even whether you agree with the conservatives and the right or not, but understand that they espouse family values. So they promote natural marriage, and not that they oppose gay marriage. They oppose eugenics and abortion. They oppose these social programs that black people have been convinced are there to help them, but ultimately they're there to oppress them and hinder them. And so it's a very clever strategy that they've employed. It's like the hidden hand. It's like you throw the rock and you hide your hand. Nobody knows that you're the one that created the problem in the first place. And then you can come in and say, here, I'll help you out. It's a very clever tactic that's being used. Instead of shooting and lynching and raping and pillaging the black community, they come up with a way to get us to kill ourselves. White supremacy no longer needs the KKK. They have gangster rap, which is a tool that was created to control white supremacy in order to destroy themselves. And if you look at the people that own the record companies, they're not black people. I'm just going to leave it at that. Nike doesn't have to steal money from poor people. They pretend to fight for poor people now, using multi-million-dollar athletes to get black people to camp out on sidewalks all over the country to give up their hard-earned money, following a false dream of equality and acceptance. Now, what's the solution? I gave a lot of problems, and I'm going to keep doing it. You can look throughout all the teaching, the book, the 2019 movement. I outline all this stuff. So the 2019 movement has come up with a solution. It's called the Manifesto. The Manifesto places principles over people and personalities. It places God over government. It helps us to understand that each person was created in God's image and has inherent value, not from man, but from God. It creates a mentality that we can make it not because man says so, but because God says so. As the Bible says, we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us or gives us the strength. We believe that God gives us the ability to gain wealth so that his covenant can be established on the earth. The manifesto is pro-life, pro-family, economic development, self-education, self-determination. It's a political movement of the kingdom of God. We determine that we don't work for or depend on the government, but the government works for us. We are looking to fulfill the Great Commission and the great destiny of a people. The destiny of a nation, the destiny of black people. We want the kingdom of our God to become the kingdoms of this world. I believe that 2019 is an Exodus chapter 3 year all over again. It's God fulfilling his promise for deliverance, liberty, and prosperity. He promises to deliver his people from great wealth. The time is now, and we ask you to join the movement. So this movement is about pro-marriage, pro-family, pro-economic empowerment. It's about depending on God and not depending on the government. It's about not compromising our principles because of people, personalities, and the strategy that's being employed, the true strategy of white supremacy. That's not a new strategy, but it's the one that the enemy has been using over and over again. This has been Dr. Joe Green. Until next time, peace and blessings to you. Please, attach to us, the 2019 movement. We're trying to fulfill what God has called us to fulfill. I bless you. Shalom, shalom.